Start you off with the presidential race here in the United States. Next year's election will mark America's 60th presidential contest. President Joe Biden, a Democrat, is seeking re-election as of now and launched his campaign last month. But the question which still remains unanswered is who will be the Republican candidate to challenge the incumbent president for the White House race if Biden does become the nominee. Donald Trump is the clear frontrunner in an increasingly crowded field seeking the Republican presidential nomination. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis also launched his bid for the hot seat as the race for the White House heats up. Former Vice President Mike Pence plans to announce his candidacy next week. Pence will officially launch his widely expected campaign in Iowa. A staunch conservative from Indiana, Pence is an ardent opponent of abortion. He has been crisscrossing the country in recent months, speaking in many of the states seen as the most consequential in the Republican nomination race. Pence will also try to embrace that the former President Trump and come out of his shadow after years of unwavering loyalty. The former vice president has recently been at loggerheads with Trump. He refused to go along with Trump's efforts to allegedly overturn the 2020 election results and remain in power. Pence said recently in March that history would hold Trump accountable for his role in the Capitol riots. Pence added Trump was wrong and said, quote, "I had no right to overturn the election." In April, he even testified in the federal investigation that was examining Trump's role in the assault on the Capitol, one among the many legal cases which the former president is currently facing. And it's not just Mike Pence who is expected to launch his bid for the White House. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is also expected to join the race next week. Meanwhile, despite a rocky start, Ron DeSantis' campaign, where his online interaction on Twitter Spaces overshadowed and crashed several times, DeSantis is preparing himself for an 18-month campaign against his one-time cheerleader, Donald Trump. The 44-year-old is offering Republicans a version of Trumpism without the so-called chaos or without Trump. Often compared with the twice-impeached former president, the Florida governor may or may not be a credible alternative to Trump, depending on who you ask. However, he still lacks Trump's national profile. DeSantis, along with other Republican candidates, faced the daunting task of closing an enormous polling gap, with Trump leading close to 50 percentage points. So which candidate will be able to catch up to the former president, if any, as the race for the White House is officially on? Well, for more on this, we are being joined by Orlando Sanchez from the great state of Texas. Orlando is a GOP strategist. Welcome to WION, and thank you so much for joining us. Well, the Republican pool is getting pretty crowded. However, former President Donald Trump seems to be the front runner, and everyone is expecting Ron DeSantis to be a second runner-up. However, judging from past primaries, are we at a point where we know the results as of now?
I think as of today, it would be safe to predict that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee in 2024.
And do you think that while Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee, there's this concern, even among Republicans, that he may not be able to win the hearts and minds of the general public and win a general election, notably among independents?
Well, that's a distinct possibility. Of course, we're well over a year, almost and a half before the presidential general election. A lot can happen. Most voters, and certainly most middle of the road sort of mainstream voter, will be looking at the economy. So they're used to and have experienced the Trump administration where inflation was stable, interest rates were not rising, oil and gas production in the United States was sufficient to drive the cost of fossil fuels down. Americans were paying $1.69 a gallon for fuel versus $3.49 today. Inflation is out of control. So I've always said that the one question, if Donald Trump is the nominee, needs to ask President Biden in a debate is the same question Ronald Reagan asked Jimmy Carter. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And most Americans will say financially, they're worse off.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. In your opinion, where does Joe Biden stand and where do the Democrats stand? It seems that they actually prefer Donald Trump to be the Republican nominee because, for one reason or the other, maybe looking back at just 2022, the midterms, they think that Trump is, quote unquote, the beatable Republican candidate. Is that the case?
Well, certainly they're stuck with Joe Biden. They nominated Joe Biden in 2020, assuming that he would be sort of a leveling effect after 4 years of Donald Trump's chaos, as you mentioned earlier. But when people look at the policies of Donald Trump, despite what he says, despite his rhetoric and his inflammatory debate, most people understand that inflation was in good shape, interest rates were in good shape, the cost of living was in good shape, there was relative stability in the country, immigration was checked at the border. And so people are going to compare. We've seen the chaos of Biden, even though he's not as vociferous, so to speak, and bombastic, but people are going to want to prefer the security that Donald Trump offered. That is, fuel stability, price stability at the grocery store. This ridiculous policy that Biden has implemented that if you have a good credit rating when you purchase a home, you're going to have to contribute to those that have less credit. People just don't like that lurch towards socialism. So I think it's going to be a stark comparison between the chaos of Joe Biden and the chaos of rhetoric of Trump, but the basic stability of the economic situation domestically.
Yeah, and hopefully the rest of the country will try to understand the average Trump voter, which is a very loyal base to the former president. I mean, they absolutely love him. Orlando Sanchez, thank you so much for joining us on WION, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.
Delighted.